Mr. Speaker, I yield such time as I may consume at this time.
Gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I support House Concurrent Resolution 63, and I want to thank our chairman of the House Armed Services Committee, the gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Skelton, also our chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, the gentleman from California, Mr. Lantos, and especially the gentleman from North Carolina, my good friend and colleague, Mr. Jones, as original co-sponsors of this legislation. Mr. Speaker, I also want to thank the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Wolf, and Mr. Richard Solomon of the United States Institute of Peace for their initiative and leadership to establish what is commonly known today as the Iraq Study Group, composed of nationally recognized leaders from both political parties and co-chaired by former Secretary of State James Baker and former Congressman and Director of the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars, Mr. Lee Hamilton. The Iraq Study Group conducted for well over 8 months a most comprehensive review, in my humble opinion, of the crisis that we are now faced with in Iraq. And I sincerely hope that in the weeks and months to come, that we here in this body will review seriously its recommendations for a resolution to the conflict in Iraq. Mr. Speaker, almost 5 years ago, as a member of the House International Relations Committee, I voted in support of the resolution which authorized our president to use military force against Saddam Hussein and his military regime for the most critical reason presented by our president, the vice president, our Secretary of Defense, our National Security Advisor, that Saddam Hussein had in his possession supposedly nuclear weapons. Our nation's own national security was severely at risk, imminent danger. These were the phrases that were used. And besides, for other reasons, the nuclear issue was the linchpin, in my humble opinion, convinced many of us on both sides of the aisle to approve the resolution to allow our president to wage war against Iraq. Mr. Speaker, our nation, and especially the American people, have now come to realize that Saddam Hussein never had in his possession nuclear weapons due to faulty intelligence and misleading statements made by top officials of this administration in order to totally change the atmosphere, to have the public believe that our number one public enemy was Saddam Hussein and not Osama bin Laden. Mr. Speaker, I ask my colleagues, how in the world did we end up in Iraq? And we have now caused more tension in the Middle East than ever before. As I recall, Mr. Speaker, our nation was attacked by some 18 terrorists, 14 Saudi Arabians, 1 Egyptian, 2 from the United Arab Emirates, and 1 Lebanese. On September 11, 2001, none of these terrorists came from Iran or Iraq. Most of them were from Saudi Arabia, and they were members of a terrorist organization that we now know as Al-Qaeda, and the leader of this terrorist group is Osama bin Laden. Our nation was attacked on September 11, 2001. Most of the nations around the world not only sympathized with us, but supported us. That even if the Congress gave authority to our president to go after Osama bin Laden and his Al-Qaeda organization that was under the protective custody of the Taliban, which at the time controlled Afghanistan and certain parts of Pakistan. It is critically important, I submit, Mr. Speaker, that our colleagues and the American people need to be reminded of what prompted our president as commander-in-chief and this Congress, what actions our nation took after our country was attacked on September 11, 2001. Our government leaders properly identified Al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden as the perpetrators of the attack on September 11, 2001. And our president and the Congress acted accordingly to summon our military forces to wage war against Osama bin Laden and his Al-Qaeda organization that was under the protection of the Taliban in Afghanistan. Well, we got rid of the Taliban, and we were successful in establishing a democratic government for the people and the leaders of Afghanistan. But we did not, and I repeat, we did not complete our mission of either killing or capturing the leader who was responsible for the attack against our country on September 11, 2001. The terrorist leader's name is Osama bin Laden. And after almost 6 years now, the most powerful country in the world militarily, Osama bin Laden has not been killed or captured, let alone the fact that we did not complete our commitment in resources and force structure to sustain Afghanistan's new